And Josh from Victorville. I read somewhere that Marc Mero, here we go again, Marc Mero, didn't I just mention him? I read somewhere that Marc Mero was the first WWE guy to get a guaranteed contract. Was this because Vince McMahon was losing Hall and Nash? I would imagine that Vince had big plans for him to give him a guaranteed deal. But his career was always mid-card level. Do you know why Vince would give him a guarantee, yet they let Hall and Nash walk? If you remember, that was one of the reasons that Hall and Nash left in the first place, was because WCW was giving them guaranteed money, and Vince McMahon just outright refused to do that. I think it had more to do with them being in a war with WCW. And losing Hall and Nash, Vince realized that, in the end, I got to make a move of my own here. I got to stem the bleeding somehow. Mero was pitting both sides against the other. And Vince really wanted to steal one away from WCW after losing so many people to them, right? I mean, he wanted to be the one to take one away from them for a change. So WCW, they made Mero a great offer to stay, but Vince McMahon topped it. That's how you do it. You play the field. Mero was smart. Vince wanted him badly enough. He gave him a signing bonus as well. Because Mero's talked about this in interviews before. He didn't just get a big fat guaranteed contract. He got a signing bonus. And he got Vince McMahon to agree to fly his wife around with him wherever he went. He didn't want to be away from his wife on the road like all the other boys. He wanted to be, have his wife at his side. So he said, look, you got to agree to pay to fly her around the country with me wherever I go. When he tells the story of flying up to Connecticut, to Titan Tower to meet with Vince McMahon for the first time, and bringing Rena, Sable, with him, Vince had never met Mero's wife before. And Mero calls up Vince before the meeting, and he goes, I see that there's only one plane ticket booked. We had agreed to fly my wife everywhere I go. And Vince basically said to him, it's a contract signing. It's not an event. For a contract signing, your wife has to be with you. And Mero's like, hey, we agreed. Where I go, she goes. So she flies up there with him to Connecticut. And the minute that Vince McMahon laid eyes on Sable, that was it. He knew instantly that he had to put her on TV. And Mero loved it. He thought that was a great idea. So that's how she became his valet. At first, if you remember, Sable walked Triple H to the ring at WrestleMania 12. That was the same night in a backstage brawl that Mero debuted. And then on television the next night is when she kind of split from Triple H, and Mero took her away, and she became valet for the Wild Man. That's how that whole thing worked out. But you look at Sable, who ended up becoming a far bigger star than Marc Mero ever was. It's not hard to see. It's not at all hard to see why Vince McMahon would have thrown the world at this guy. But again, forgetting Sable for a second, he needed a win. Vince felt he needed a win. He had to change the narrative that everybody was jumping ship from a dying brand to jump to WCW. He lost Hogan, he lost Savage, lost a lot of people. They thought they had a handshake deal with Lex Luger to re-sign and to stay in the company in 95. And he put the knife right in their back. He jumped ship and popped up at the Mall of America on Monday Nitro. You don't think that stung? You think Vince McMahon forgot about that so quickly? That only happened the year before they signed Mero. Nitro had started, so now Nitro is competing with them every Monday night. And Mero was, again, he was making great money in WWE. He got a great deal to the point that Mick Foley, and it's kind of weird because you never really hear stories like this about Mick Foley. You'll hear about what a great guy he is, and everybody says great things about him, and there's nothing really overtly negative about Mick Foley. But Mick Foley resented Mero for his contract. He talked about it in his first book. It bothered him a lot when he found out that Mero was making so much money. He was making more money than what he was making. He was making more money than what Steve Austin was making. Now, Austin had only been brought into the company a few months before Mero was. And as far as Foley goes, Foley didn't even debut on TV until the night after WrestleMania, which was the same night that Mero debuted. They actually debuted, I believe, on the very same night. I guess Mero debuted the night before, technically, at WrestleMania. But the same weekend, those two debuted. So they all came in around the same time. But it's not hard to see why Mero would make more. Vince made a calculated decision, you know? And look, all due respect to Mick Foley, the only reason that he even got signed to WWE is because Jim Ross went to bat for him. Jim Ross nagged and annoyed Vince McMahon to the point about this guy, to the point that Vince said, fine, I'll let you sign him, but he's your responsibility. Your ass is on the line if it doesn't work out and he doesn't get over. Vince just did not see Mick Foley as a star at all. He didn't see what the big deal was. There was nothing about him that appealed to him. It was all Jim Ross going to bat for him and putting in a good word and saying, look, it's all on me. It's my signing. Don't worry, it's all on me. And obviously it worked out. And Vince saw the value in having somebody like Mick Foley, because within a few months he was wrestling Shawn Michaels for the championship. And they were putting him over The Undertaker in a way that nobody had been put over The Undertaker before. They were giving him wins on pay-per-view over The Undertaker. So that worked out for JR. That worked out really well for Mick Foley. But again, at the time, why would Vince McMahon pay Mick Foley more money than a guy like Marc Mero if he didn't see anything in him? I mean, Johnny B. Bad was a relatively successful kind of mid-card act in WCW. He had some success. Cactus Jack did too, but if Vince McMahon doesn't see anything in Cactus Jack, then why the hell is he going to pay him more than he would pay Marc Mero? That doesn't make a lot of sense.